because it was a flawed system. Then, of course, they overextended themselves overseas, and guess what? They went and overextended themselves in a place called Afghanistan. And, of course, that ended their empire. 15 of their satellite countries were broken up. What an opportunity we have, and still do. We have so many weapons. We probably could defend ourselves for the next 100 years with 6 submarines. You know, we have so much nuclear power. If anybody touched us, we are a very powerful nation. The thing that threatens us is internally in our financial system and our moral fiber. That's what I would like to see a constitutional non-interventionist foreign policy and bring all the troops home from Korea and Japan and Europe and do any betting, I would take the side of the bet that says our troops are going to be in Iraq for a long, long time until we're flat-out broke and we'll have to come home. So we don't, you know, in 1964 there was a peace candidate and a war candidate. Remember? Goldwater was the war candidate. Couldn't have him because he'd expand the war. So we voted for the peace candidate, and that was LBJ, and look at what happened there. I mean, it went on and on. So for some reason, there are times when you just can't almost never trust what those politicians say when they're campaigning. Very difficult. But the mess we have over there is going to continue. You know, just the Iraq situation. I mean, nobody knows exactly how many billions of dollars, because they have war budgets that are off budget, and then there's all this spending within the DOD budget, but it's hundreds of billions of dollars that we have spent. And you know, that might have just helped us if we had either been given tax rebates, or you know, cut spending or spending here at home. I'm really willing to compromise at times. And I say that if you're getting ready to spend money and you waste it overseas, I say spend it at home. You might as well waste it here at home rather than wasting it overseas. And we say, oh, you elected the wrong one. We don't like those leaders, so we're not going to accept them. We won't recognize them. How hypocritical can that be? And then you wonder why we lose credibility around the world. And it would be so nice to have a time when we as Americans could have followed the advice of the Founding Fathers and just say, look, no entangling alliances, no nation building, no warmongering. And then they'll say, we can't talk to these people. These are people terrible. One time at one of the debates, it would happen more than one that I got booed and pissed. But I knew you were out there and you weren't doing it, so that kept me going. One time I suggested in Miami, of course, that we should talk to the Cubans, talk to Castro, open up the doors, travel and trade with them. We've had sanctions on for 40 years, and they keep blaming us for all their problems, and what have we achieved? And we have been taught, economically and historically, that if you trade and talk with people, you're less likely to fight with them. And yet, because of the animosities, people say, well, no, you can't do that. But didn't we talk to Khrushchev? And didn't we talk to Gorbachev? And we went to China, and I feel better about China, even though there's a lot of problems over there. And we have resolutions in the House floor condemning the violations of human rights in China. And I might be the only one that will vote opposed to it. Not that I don't think they have violations. I'll say, they'll come and say, why aren't you voting for this? Do you think they don't violate human rights over there, individual rights? And I said, no, I believe that. And I said, when our house is clean, when our plate is clean, and we don't violate it, then I'll vote for it. Really was what it meant, because immediately, you know, to be there, and it was one of the early debates, and it was on a national stage, and the audience was obviously not on our side, and so I walked off, and at the time, Ken Snyder, our campaign manager, came up to me, and within minutes after the debate was over, he came over and he says, Ron, guess what? He says, you're winning the post-debate polling. me on. But, you know, in a way, I think I should send him a thank you note, because I think he probably did more good for our movement than anything else by stirring up the troops. But I believe the point is very clear. You know, I simplified that night by saying, they're over here because we're over there. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. And I believe I mentioned at that time Robert Pape's book, Dying to Win. And he studied this. He convinced me, because when I started reading his book, I was convinced, as so many others have been convinced, that it's that religion. They teach hatred, and it's a hateful religion, and that's why they come. But I read his book and studied it, and he convinced me that the prevailing reason why people are willing to sacrifice their life is because they get so outraged by the destruction of their homeland because foreigners come and occupy their land. And we need to understand that. We would be outraged, we would be unified, and we would be making good use of the Second Amendment. It need not be this way. We have drifted for probably 100 years or so in this direction. We have accepted the notion that we can regulate economic transactions, that it is necessary and purposeful, and if we didn't regulate every economic transaction, from setting wages like they started to do in the Depression, and not protecting every transaction and interfering in every contract, that there would be no prosperity. Of course, the opposite is true. We as a nation have come to understand pretty well, even though we see violations all the time, that the First Amendment means that the press should be regulated. I understand today there was a proposal we'd start bailing out the newspapers. I don't know what that's going to mean, but I think that's a lost cause. I think the Internet's going to win that fight. But the whole thing is that we do have an ominous responsibility in what we do. And we have to understand that liberty is what we're working for. And liberty is all messed up. I mean, the concept of liberty, it's been messed up because of what's happened in the last 100 years. The Depression played a major role in this, because they blame the Depression as they're trying to blame this Depression on the same thing: freedom, free markets, and not on the Federal Reserve. That it was the capitalism that brought us to this. They did that on the Depression. The gold standard and too much freedom was the cause. So they ushered in this age of 75 to 100 years where economic liberty had to be regulated. And yet we still respect the idea that we shouldn't practice prior restraint. And fortunately, to some degree, we practice and believe that we should not regulate personal behavior. That's up to the individual. I hope we can help protect those liberties, but it does more to undermine those liberties. It does more. One responsibility we might say, matter of fact, it's in the Constitution, that we're not allowed to counterfeit. But what do we have? We have the biggest counterfeiting machine in the history of the world right out of Washington. So the government is supposed to protect property rights. What is it? Do we really own our property? We pay rent, and then we ask the government when we can use it. So we have the government so involved in what we do economically, and then we wonder why the country is getting poorer. And the worst part of the story, at least for now, is that we're a lot poorer than it appears right now. Because almost everybody now is poorer than they were a year ago. But believe me, the country can get a lot poorer. Now, do I worry about this? Yes, I do, because it was so unnecessary. We shouldn't have had to go through this. But the one thing I don't worry about is if we did the right thing, if we restored constitutional law, understood what private property was, understood what honest money was all about, had our personal liberties, didn't have an income tax, and we were all broke, and we could all go out tomorrow and start working, I wouldn't worry about you for 1 minute. That's dangerous. That's dangerous because we can send all the checks out that we want to from Washington, D.C., but you won't be able to send them out fast enough.